A lot of people think the New Testament was written hundreds of years after Jesus, either by a church council or some nefarious church leaders who wanted to invent his divinity. But that's just false. And how do we know? Well, the long story short is because that we have manuscripts that predate church fathers or church councils. And that demonstrates that these texts were written in the lifetime of eyewitnesses. Paul's letters, for example, were circulating by the 50s AD. That's less than 20 years after Jesus' death. And that's way too soon for myths to form. And the people who wrote them were eyewitnesses like Matthew and John, or else they were very close companions to the eyewitnesses like Luke and Mark. And they interviewed people who were eyewitnesses themselves. Now, even skeptics like Bart Ehrman acknowledge that Paul, for example, personally knew Peter and James, Jesus' own brother. And we have their writings. So what about church councils then? Well, they didn't create the Bible either. They just recognized the books that Christians had already been reading and using for generations. By the time of Nicaea, the Gospels and letters were widely circulated and in many languages as well. And that's way too late to be inventing anything new, because then literally everyone would be calling them out, as later heretics in fact were. So the idea that Jesus' divinity was invented later is also wrong. The earliest writings, archaeology, creeds that we have, all of which at least I've mentioned in part, have already mentioned him as Lord, Savior, and God. Now, Christianity didn't evolve into worship of Jesus. It started that way. Thomas said, "My Lord and my God," when he saw the resurrected Jesus. So when you pick up a New Testament, you're not holding a legend that was written centuries later. You're holding the earliest Christian voices who echoed what they heard, saw, and believed from the very beginning.